Alright, today we're going to work with watercolor, one of my favorite mediums to work with. And so a couple basic things you need tool-wise. You need some paper, you need some watercolor paints. This simple tray of 8 paints is just fine. You need a brush, you need some water, okay, because these paints are activated by water. Alright, one of the things that's neat about watercolor paint is some of the effects and techniques that you can use when creating with watercolor. I'm going to show you those real quick, then we're going to do a quick sketch of our picture and demonstrate that very fast. Alright, so one of the things about watercolor is that it is transparent. Transparent means you can see through it, as opposed to opaque, which means it's too thick for you to see through. Okay, so when you're applying watercolor, especially if you have time to do it, to let one layer dry, then you go back and paint, it'll be transparent and that layer underneath will start to show through. So what I did to demonstrate that is I painted this circle and I used a hair dryer to dry it really quickly. And so now I'm going to paint this other circle over top of this, and we're going to see this color showing through. I decided to use a little Venn diagram to do that. So what you want to do is you want to get your brush wet, and you want to just drip clean water onto whatever color you are using. Okay, I wouldn't do the whole tray, I would just do them as you need them. And then in between each color change, make sure you rinse out your brush to keep it clean. Okay, and so I got it wet here, so I'm going to move that water around and get that blue nice and activated. Okay, wipe it off a little bit on there. Oh, you can also use the top of your tray for watercolor to mix colors. Let's say you wanted to make something that was a little more blue-greenish, kind of a teal color. You could get a little blue, put it in your tray, get a little green, put it in there, and mix those together. All right. So we're going to take this blue, and we're going to paint the second circle. A little bit more water because I want to thin that down just a little bit. I want it to have that nice, light, transparent look to it. That's one of the fun things about watercolor. You can have a lot of fun moving that paint around. Okay, so what I wanted to demonstrate here, and hopefully you can see that pretty well, is that yellow from the first layer that dried is now showing through this transparent blue layer. Okay, and then as those colors kind of overlay each other, you can see the green that it's mixing to. Let me draw that a little closer to the camera there so you can see that. Okay, I didn't put any green over there. I just painted the blue transparent over that yellow that was already dry, and it shows through. Okay, another fun thing with watercolor is if you have watercolor pencils. Okay, these are pretty slick because then you get the effect of color pencil along with the feel of watercolor. Okay, so you can draw with them like you do a color pencil, but then when you apply water, you can get that to start to now react like watercolor paint, which is really fun. Okay, again, rinse out your brush in between colors when you change colors. Okay. And so that color pencil now is acting and working like watercolor paint. So those are really fun. You can control where you put it a lot better, and you can have a lot of fun with that. And you still get that nice transparent feel that you would get with watercolor. Another technique is what we call wet on wet. And this is kind of fun because what you do is you wet your paper first. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to draw another circle on here. We'll work inside this circle. Okay. Alright, so this is going to be our area. So I'm going to take clean water. And you usually don't need much water, but every now and then you might need to rinse your water and get some fresh water. Okay, so I'm just using clean water out of my cup and painting it inside that circle area. Okay, so I'm just really wetting the paper down. And this is a wet on wet technique. This is very popular in watercolor. And let's use a different color this time. Let's wet the green a little bit. Okay, so I load up my brush with some wet green paint, and as I apply it, oh look at that, as I apply that to that already wet area, that water starts to spread, it starts to move. You get some really cool effects going with your watercolor. You can go back in and add a little more water to that if you want to. Go back in, the brush a little bit there. Go back in, apply some more green paint, and you can watch that paint just really spread and move all over the place. You get some really cool stuff happening with that wet on wet technique. Okay, if you're not using a wet on wet technique, you can just use a straight painting dry brush, we call it, even though you got wet paint on it, approach, and that's where you would just paint directly onto your paper. Okay, and you just want to control where you put it and keep it even. Okay, so you can just paint directly on, or you can wet the paper first. Then you can do a technique called blotting, where you take a paper towel or a Kleenex and you just lift out some of that paint just to change the effect of that a little bit. Okay, so all of those are really cool watercolor techniques: wet on wet, dry brush blotting, getting that transparent overlap, using color pencils, the watercolor type of pencils to work with. Okay, so last thing I'm going to show you real quick is you're going to be painting. I've given you two subjects that you can choose from, and so I'm just going to quickly do just a really fast sketch here. I'm not trying to really detail this too much, just doing it really fast. Drawing of this pelican who's sitting here on this fence. Okay. Let's draw part of the fence in here. Get his wing kind of sketched in here. Now, if I were doing this for an actual drawing that I wanted to be a final piece of art, I would take my time and do a good pencil drawing, and then do my painting. And I would also try to not do it in just one setting, because I'd want parts to dry, or I didn't want the wet on wet technique to cause my colors to run together. I'd want to make sure I let them dry in between. Okay, so here's our quick minute sketch here of our subject. Then I'm going to go in and start to paint. Okay, so he's got a yellow on top of his head, but then that yellow gets lighter. And so now I'm going to wet this and just kind of pull some of that paint down into that area so it gets a little bit lighter. Stays darker at the top, gets a little lighter there. Giving some of my black paint there. Now you really want to be careful if you're doing this fast, because those colors can start to run together. If I touch that wet area, it's going to give me that wet on wet technique effect. And if I don't want that, I'm not going to be happy. Okay, and so I'm going to pull that down. And you can see it's already starting to happen a little bit there. Pull some of that paint down. Okay. Now, there is no white paint in watercolor, so in order to get certain things happening, I just use a little bit more water and it thins it down. If I want a gray like this, okay, I can't mix black and white to get gray, but I can mix black watercolor with more water and I can thin that down. Okay. Anything that I want to be the absolute white of the paper, then I would just leave it the white of the paper. Okay, that's how you work with watercolor. Okay, the paper becomes another color for you. Okay. I'm just going to pull some of that up there. Pull that flipper down, or that leg. Okay. And then again, I'm being really careful here because this is wet. I'm trying not to get it to run together. But I want to get some of this water behind my subject here. So I'm be careful Just in this case, I'm mixing my blue and my green together to make a nice water aqua color. I'm just letting it kind of run together there. Having some fun with that. Love watercolor. I love it, I love it, I love it. Okay, so outside. Now I actually touched in that yellow color there a little bit. That's where my blotting can come in there too. I can go in there and clean that up a little bit. Okay. And again, I'm working quickly here. And when you don't have much time, you got to work a little looser. You can't be maybe as exact as you might be otherwise. But this is more about just letting you sample using some watercolor. Just getting a little bit of a feel for it. I would encourage you to get some watercolors at home and take your time. Do something a little more detailed, a little bit more work a little bit more patiently. Okay, so I'm just putting a little fence post in there. And I can go back in and I can block to lighten it up a little bit. Okay. And I can have fun with that. What's really cool too is that if this dries and I want to, I can go back over it with marker, with pencil, and add some more drawing detail to this picture. Okay, and so I can have some fun really making this a cool illustration. A lot of children's book authors work in watercolor, and they will add pen as well as the paint to get a nice look to their watercolor. Okay, so this little yellow at the tip of his bill there, just a bit. Just gonna add just a little color there. Not too much. Go back in with water and kind of thin that, blot it out. And again, just have some fun with that watercolor. Okay, so give that a try. See what you think. Our other one is a flower petal. So again, quick sketch of that petal. Those little parts sticking up in the middle here. Okay. Alright, so quick sketch, and then I can go in doing the wet on wet technique with that. Alright, so have fun with the watercolor. Alright.